Hello, my friends. I'm John Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and welcome to Quartet. We appreciate you coming and being with us as we get together every 2 weeks like this to kind of dig deeply into some of the big issues that are related to the transition to a whole new world and a new human. Well, let's talk a little bit about our topic of today. Our question for today is, how do you know the truth? How can you tell the truth in a time of kind of a wholesale effort to obscure the truth? How do you tell the truth when it's not obvious? It is forcing us into an area that we're not familiar with, but that we cannot effectively deal in our everyday lives unless we figure out how to work in this kind of space.
When I'm looking for truth, I'm not looking for the truth that other people are looking for. I'm looking for what is. What is the truth. That's what's happening at the moment. It may be what I want, it may be what I don't want, but that's what is. What I see people doing across the board. Some fact comes in, some media is presented, some information is thrown at us. And what people do is take that information, and then they start weaving this whole story around it. In terms of recognizing truth, how do you recognize the truth? And what I'll just say what I know. When something new comes into our field, we as an individual immediately, let's say it's a new person. Let me use a person, for example. We immediately leave the body, become that person for a split second, and then come back to the self, bringing information about the configuration of that person. And we bring that back to ourselves. When we do that, when you tune into frequency, you can pick up intent. And the intent is either going to be good or bad. And we say, okay, some information comes into your field of awareness. You tune into that information automatically in order to get the feel of that. The feel is the intent. And you can, if you don't have the ability to reconfigure, you're going to miss the intent, and you're going to miss probably a lot of the information in that field of information. If you do have the ability to configure or reconfigure yourself momentarily, and you do have permission to feel, then you'll come back with some information and the intent of that. And intent is built in to the frequency signature. It's something that is, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. In every single frequency carries an intent.
And for me, it happens on two different levels. There's a personal truth. Everyone watching this broadcast, if they have not already had the experience, will have an experience where something will happen. Something will cross their paths. They'll be in a position where they have to make a choice or decision. There'll be no one to ask, nobody to Google, no reference point, and all we have is ourselves. What science is telling us is that we have neurons in the human heart that are linked to a field of information that is housed in energy. So we know the energetic field is there, but that field is also information. And that field is not bound by the laws of space and time as we know them today. This is the report from a very recent physics paper. So what that means is that when we can learn to trust heart intelligence, intuition is part of that, but it goes beyond that. When we can trust heart intelligence, then we can determine what is true for us in the moment. Doesn't necessarily mean it's true for our neighbors or for our family, but what's true for us, what's good for us, what's healthy for us, and that's one kind of truth. And I think we're all, as the new human emerges, we're being invited, in some cases forced, to rely more upon this biological access to a field of information that bypasses the narratives of the mainstream, the narratives of people who are trying to coerce us into decisions. I've experienced this recently. Of what I call a functional truth or a functional, way of dealing with what's happening. And I know not everyone has the time to do the research. But I'm just going to give an example. I had the opportunity a few years ago, 2017, to be at the CERN superconducting supercollider in Geneva. And I was sharing with our community my experience, and I caught so much hate from being at CERN because there was a posting going around about the evil things that were happening at CERN that I saw no evidence of. So I took the time to research it, and there were probably 130 posts. But the deeper I went, it was a circular post that all went back to one blog from one person that was just an opinion, had no science, no fact, but it was coming from so many different places. It looked like everybody was saying it. It was only one person. So just by doing a little research, sometimes you can help to at least eliminate some of the frightening things.
As humans, we mediate the environment. And I think what we're seeing now is a sign of the times. We have notions and concepts of hyperreality, fake news, hypernormalization. I think what they're signifying is like the end of an era, the end of a cycle, because the structures that socially, culturally, psychologically, emotionally, that people use to mediate their environment are now be breaking loose from their mooring, from their structures. The last part of this cycle was so strongly mediated by externalities. I think because of the deepening into materialism, into modernism and the so-called structures of post-industrialization of modern societies, we were conditioned to externalize ourselves. That is shifting from an inner directed person to an outer directed person. And when you do that, you seek validation, you seek authority. And I think what's happened is that the kind of sense of self-sovereignty got kind of mediated out or got brokered out to a third party. A great Persian teacher, Jalaluddin Rumi, said there's two types of intelligence. One is acquired intelligence. It's what's given to us and we take on board and we put it on top of us. The other type is an inner knowing. It's a fountainhead which exists within you. And I think, again, what Penny and Gregg were saying, what they were suggesting, the same thing. We've shifted away from our own sense of sovereignty, this fountainhead of knowing, and we started to seek clarification, verification, authority outside of us. So I think what we're seeing now as this kind of era breaks down is that we need to shift back to an inner directed kind of sense of community, a sense of the human being, which means going from outer directed back to inner directed. And that's a shift which may seem uncomfortable, but which is necessary for now this kind of part we're moving into now.
So now we've spent a little bit of time kind of describing the issue or the problem, and what I'd like to do is see if we can kind of poke a little bit on kind of the practical matter of how you change how you think and how you operate and to be able to deal in this space. Back in 1984, I was living in Chicago. All of a sudden, the ability to run a presidential campaign dropped into my lap. And let me tell you, I had no interest in politics. I had no interest in any of this stuff. Now, this kid grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, with a very conservative Christian background. And it was real clear to me what was right and what was wrong. And I suddenly found myself parachuted into the middle of Richard Daley's machine in the middle of Chicago. And let me tell you something, there was no right and there was no wrong in that space. It was all pretty wrong, and there was no white and no black. It was all gray to black, and it was an interesting kind of shell shock to me. it was amazing to me how that it became very subjective. And somehow you had to then navigate through this, and you couldn't use any of the kind of the typical kind of capabilities and skills that you had brought into the table with you. And so I wonder, I see this in somewhat the same way, that the environment, the context is changing. And so the ability to kind of do pattern recognition and to be able to have traditional kind of ways in which to know what is real and what's not are going away.
We have skills and there are tools and all of that, but before we can even begin to use any of those, I think the first thing that we have to understand is that we are creating that future. It's us. It's our consciousness. Nobody's doing that. We're not innocent bystanders. We're not helpless victims.
Yeah. So the number one thing we need to do is realize that we create all of this. And if we change our mind, if you will, in kind of Bruce Lipton terms, you change the world, or you change our reality.
To navigate 2022 and from here on, everyone is going to need what I call a very strong soul compass. That soul compass is the absolute knowing of who you are as an individual. We have been indoctrinated for generations now to hinge our sense of well-being on the world around us, on our external reality. If we can come to terms with this extraordinary potential within us that we're all talking about here today, then it gives us the sovereignty to step back and allow the world to go through a necessary shift without sinking with the ship. Again, this is why the heart intelligence is so important. So when we can learn to bypass those ego filters that protect us and go directly into the heart and say, what does this mean to me? What does this mean to my family? Is this good for me? Is this healthy for me? Then at least we know for us what's true.
When human children are born, their human nervous system is not fully completed yet. And what their energetic nervous system does is put out vibrational feelers and tries to feel what's the environmental situation and attune to that. So that's why we are very strongly related to our physical earthly environment, because our nervous system finishes off its growth by attuning to the vibrational environment it's born into. We're going through the same thing now, is that we are, whether we can realize it or not, we are shifting our patterning within us, both within our energetic patterns, vibrational patterns, and even neuronal patterns. We know about neuroplasticity. So I think it's important to actually understand, where then do we put ourselves vibrationally, in what context? Because if we get pulled into this chaotic, fear, reactive kind of vibration environment, we will then attune to that and feel that, oh, that's the new world that's being born. But it's not. That's the falsehood.
A good analogy is we aren't victims, and it's kind of like a marriage. You don't just one day wake up and discover that you're married. There's been a process to that. You saw somebody, you met somebody, you talked with them, you liked what they were, etc., and you pursue them. And then you ask them to marry you, and then you get married and you live with them. And then after a while, maybe you grow apart, and then it's no longer working. And so you say, I have to move on. But there's this period of great distress. There's a period of great, sorrow. Maybe there'll be some fighting as you try to settle things. And then one day you wake up and you say, it's a whole new world. And that's what I think we're going through.
What we've got is a series of things. Innovation, we've talked about letting go of the old reality, being trusting of the kind of the emergence of the new thing. We've talked about old kind of patterns breaking down, and then, pattern changes in the middle of all of this stuff. And I think the underlying point is that you just really have to unplug yourself and rise to this kind of floating space that allows you to, for me at least, it really works when you just think about it rather than embrace it with your heart and give emotion to it, to the outside. I mean, it's important to know what's going on, but if you realize that it's going to work out all right, that there's a direction to all of this, and that it's happened other places and so on, then what we have is kind of the basis for rising to the occasion and becoming someone new. So thank you for that good conversation. And thank you all for being with us today, those of you who are viewers. We really appreciate it. We appreciate the questions and the comments that you put in underneath the Quartet page and the arlingtoninstitute.org website. We all read them, and we're happy to consider them all. And we hope you'll come back and be with us in 2 weeks here on Quartet. So thanks so much.